You might think of them as gorgeous white figures with wings carrying out God's commands, but they're a lot more complicated than that. From the powerful beings that control the elements and are in charge of rain, wind, and snow, to ones covered entirely with eyes. There's a lot more to angels than you know. This is all about the angelic order, type, and hierarchy. Okay, so first up is the world of the angelic hierarchy, imagined by Pseudo-Dionysius, a Christian theologian from the 6th century. His writings have had a huge impact over the centuries, shaping how people understand angels today. So Pseudo-Dionysius came up with this cool idea of organizing angels into 9 different groups or choirs, based on how close they are to God's throne. These choirs are arranged in 3 triads, which represent the Holy Trinity. Now let's break it down from bottom to top, starting with the earthly realm and moving towards the heavenly. At the bottom of the ladder, we have the angels, the most down-to-earth of them all. They're closest to us and farthest from God's throne. Moving up, we have archangels and principalities in the 3rd triad, each group representing a step closer to God. It's like each step stands for a higher level of spiritual significance. But what's interesting is that this hierarchy isn't just about status, it's about function too. The higher up you go, the less involved angels are with earthly matters. So while angels might be closer to us, they're also more involved in our everyday lives compared to those in the higher ranks. And now that you've gotten the gist of it, let's get into the nitty-gritty of each choir in more detail. So, angels, just like other celestial choirs, are pure spiritual beings whose main job is to carry out what God wants. These guys are big on looking out for us humans and delivering God's messages. They're like the heavenly postmen, but with a lot more power. Being the closest to us, guardian angels are the ones who keep an eye on places like churches, towns, and even whole countries. They're there to deliver good news, like the birth of Jesus, or sometimes not so great news, like the warning of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction. They also help humans stay on the right path and resist doing things they shouldn't. And man, they pack a punch. And there's this crazy story about one angel wiping out a whole army of Assyrians, like 185,000 soldiers gone in a blink. And if you think that's impressive, wait till you hear about the archangels. Now, when it comes to archangels, it gets a bit tricky. Take Michael, for example. He's often seen as the big boss of the archangels, like the head honcho. But here's the thing, he's actually ranked pretty low in the hierarchy. Doesn't quite add up, does it? Same goes for Gabriel and a few others. So why the confusion? Well, it's all thanks to the evolution of the angelic hierarchy. Now, back in the day, there were just 2 categories, angels and archangels. But as time went on, things got a lot more complicated. Dionysius and others brought in new frameworks, like the one with 9 choirs. Because archangels were seen as closely tied to humanity, they got placed lower down the ladder, farther from God's throne. Now, archangels are kind of like supercharged angels. They're more powerful and have been around longer. They're all about carrying out God's will, especially when it comes to us humans. Their love, strength, and goodness are off the charts. Most people say there are 7 archangels, which adds up with what the New Testament says about 7 angels standing before God. So while archangels might be lower in rank, they're still pretty darn important when it comes to making things happen. And speaking of making things happen, have you heard about principalities? You might remember them as princedoms or princes. Well, the bottom line is, they're like the stewards of different areas, ranging from big nation states to tiny little villages. They're also the protectors of leaders, whether they're kings, religious figures, or politicians. Experts have pointed out some important points. Principalities are more about administration, and they're believed to have more power, so they're more likely to get involved directly in what's happening down here on Earth. They might encourage religious practices through prayers, or even influence political thinking. Pretty cool, don't you think? Well, not cooler than the powers, also known as the authorities, potentates, or forces. Dionysius talks about how they're the frontline defense against dark forces of hell, constantly working to stop their plan. These guys are all about keeping the world from slipping into darkness, defending creation, and keeping a nice balance between good and evil. They're represented by the colors green and gold, and their symbol is the flaming sword. Now, let's move on to the virtues, the overseers of both the earthly and celestial realms, making sure everything runs smoothly. They're in charge of the elements, like rain, wind, and snow, ensuring they're all in harmony. On top of that, they're behind miracles, giving people the strength to follow the right path. Oh, let's not forget about the dominations. So you know those heavenly beings often mentioned in religious texts? Well, they go by names like dominions or lords, and in Hebrew, they're called Hashmalim. Dionysius says they're like the managers of the angel squad, making sure everything runs smoothly up there and reflects what God wants. And here's the thing, they're the backstage crew of the divine drama, so they rarely make an appearance to us humans. But even when they're behind the scenes, they play a huge role in keeping the universe in order. Their job involves handling the nitty-gritty stuff of creation, and they're pros at giving tasks to lower-ranking angels. And get this, they take their orders from even higher up angelic beings, like the thrones or the cherubim. And speaking of thrones, they're part of this elite group, along with cherubim and seraphim. And did you know that Thomas Aquinas went into crazy detail about how thrones were all about divine justice? Being the judges of the angelic realm, what sets them apart is their humility. Despite being top-tier angels, they're down to earth, which makes them super fair and unbiased. In some Jewish traditions, thrones are described as the chariots or wheels that carry God's throne around. You can also find this in the book of Ezekiel, which says that the wheels sparkled like chrysolite with high rims, and all four rims were full of eyes. Yeah, it's a bit trippy, but those eyes symbolize deep wisdom, giving you the sense that these beings are all about seeing and understanding everything. And I mean everything. All right, now, let's break down the cherubim. These guys pop up in the Old Testament, right after Adam and Eve got the boot from the Garden of Eden. They're usually stationed at the eastern gate with a flaming sword, guarding the tree of life like it's their day job. Only the seraphim get a seat closer to God's throne, so you can guess how high up the cherubim are in the angelic pecking order. Now, when we talk about knowledge, these cherubim have loads of it. Plus, they're not just sitting around. They're busy keeping cosmic records straight. Ezekiel gives us a nice description of them, saying they have human-like bodies, but with 4 faces and 4 wings each. And get this, their legs are straight, feet like calves, and shining like bronze. Oh, their faces? Well, they've got the whole zoo going on. Human, lion, ox, and eagle faces all in one. Now, where did they get this wild imagery from? Well, some say it's inspired by ancient Assyrian or Akkadian art. Back then, it was trendy to have these fantastical creatures guarding palaces and temples, with bodies mixing up all sorts of animals like lions, bulls, and eagles. In Christian teachings, their main gig is singing God's praises, but in more mysterious traditions, they're rumored to have some heavy-duty responsibilities, like looking after God's chariot and lugging around his throne. Finally, it's time for the highest rank of the angelic world, the seraphim. The seraphims are basically VIPs in God's service, stationed closest to the divine throne. Their main gig? Circling around the Lord's throne non-stop. Now, the seraphim have 6 wings, 2 covering their faces, 2 for their feet, and 2 for flying around. Oh, and they're covered with eyes. Now, when you hear red wings, don't think of flames of punishment. Nope. It's all about showing the fiery power of love. In the book of Enoch, they're described as having 16 faces, radiating a light so bright that even other angels can't handle it. When it comes to leadership, there's been some debate. Some say it's Metatron, Michael, or Seraphiel, while others even throw Satan's name into the mix, before he went rogue, of course. But regardless of who's leading the charge, these seraphim are the A-listers of the celestial realm. And hey, if you're digging this angelic info, click on this next video. Find out more about Lucifer, the fallen angel.